Let's talk about the congressional showdown on $50 billion to $100 billion in aid. So there are some senators in the Senate, where else would they be? U.S. senators in the federal Senate that are proposing a one big aid package of $50 billion to $70 billion, and in some estimations, some are even pushing to $90 to $100 billion. They're talking about being able to negotiate the total number at the end of the day. They're negotiating and talking about putting forward a bill, or they're going to put forward a bill that proposes $50 to $100 billion in aid. And their argument is, look, every few weeks, every few months, we all get together and yell about the new Ukraine aid package, and we're sending it slowly to the Ukrainians in a drip approach. And the Ukrainians right now are left guessing whether in 3 months the aid to Ukraine, which the Biden administration has said that the aid to Ukraine is going to dry up in 3 months if Congress doesn't come to some decision. We avoid Ukraine guessing if they're going to have those future commitments. We avoid the Europeans who have already committed to double the amount of aid that we have sent through multi-year aid commitment packages. We avoid them doubting our leadership on the issue and seeing them possibly pull back, as we see Slovakia turning to a far-right pro-Russian direction with its government, with its recent elections. The last thing is we should do is fester that more by basically telling the Europeans, you deal with this yourself. Instead of taking this drip approach, we say 50 billion to 100 billion. This is the year-long Ukraine aid budget. We can debate this because here it is right here. The majority of the people in the Senate support Ukraine. The majority of the people in the House support Ukraine. The president and his cabinet support Ukraine. And the majority of Americans support Ukraine, and that support increases to a strong majority once you give them key facts about the war. And we've talked about the polling data before on the channel. And so, if that's the domestic political situation, but we know due to the speakership's chaos that the Ukrainians are worried about future American military commitments, it's hard for them to feel confident in engaging in certain operations if they think at any time maybe the tap's going to be turned off. And we need to make them positive that our aid commitments are not going to cut off, so they feel confident to engage in operations. Don't hold back so we don't pointlessly extend the war. I'm really not happy with the drip approach. I'm really not, because there's people in the United States Congress, a group of small radicals, some of them just, I think in some ways, just blatantly pro-Russian, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying things like Ukrainians are harvesting babies' organs to pay for their war effort. That sounds like something you'd get out of the worst of anti-Semitic propaganda, like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, produced by the Russian Tsardom. That is just like bizarre propaganda that's being repeated by U.S. Congress people, and those are the people that the current people running. I was gonna say Steve Scalise, but apparently that fell through while I was starting up today's stream. That the different people running for the speakership have to court, and so we have a small group of radicals leading the Republican Party by the nose, having the tail wag the dog, when we know that at least half of Republicans in the House still support Ukraine aid. We know that. We know that the majority of them in the Senate do. We know that basically all the Democrats in both the House and the Senate also support the aid. So a vast majority. But because that small group is having the tail wag the dog of the Republican Party, now this is up for question. Now we don't know if the aid is if we're going to be able to approve an aid package in the next 3 months. Biden says he's confident. We have people who are pushing this bill who think it's confident, and who are confident they'll be able to get some aid. We got Republican members of the House who were saying that a few weeks ago. But now that Kevin McCarthy's fell through, seems like Steve Scalise is falling through. If you don't have House leadership, then you cannot vote on legislation and pass it. And that is like, even if they had the votes, if they don't have a speaker that'll bring the vote forward, or don't have a speaker at all, then they can't pass anything. And this isn't only true for Ukraine aid. This is going to be true for other issues as well, both domestic and international crises. And again, this type of clash is going to happen with these small radicals trying to dominate the conversation. And when I say small radicals, when I'm talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, these are people who are just parroting open Russian propaganda, right? That is the small radicals. There is a decent isolationist chunk of the Republican Party in the House as well. But when I'm talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are repeating Russian state talking points, like those are the people who are trying to dominate the conversation online.
Druidism has donated $5. I'm just returning, and this sounds like sad and stupid developments. As such, I demand you spend this on Fig Newtons.
Thank you for the $5. I don't know if it'll be on Fig Newtons, maybe Oreos. But the smart thing to do, if we're going to have this problem every time, and they're going to try to basically derail any work in the House that this comes up, is you just get it through in one big package so we don't have to deal with this issue that much over the next year. And then when the next year comes around, we can review the situation on the ground in Ukraine and then pass another aid package for the next year or change our strategy accordingly depending on the developments on the ground. Instead of doing this every few months and allowing these people to get on stage and talk about baby harvesting and, oh, the poor ethnic Russians who deserve to take all the land, or, oh, it's just an ethnic struggle, it's just like a border dispute, or any of the people trying to downplay the suffering. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a debate. What I am saying is that a group of like 4 to 5 people shouldn't be dominating the debate. And they shouldn't be leading Congress by the nose on this. And they're taking advantage of the chaos to do that. Now that the shock of the initial invasion has worn off, and that Bucha's a little bit more distant in their mind, they're hoping that everyone forgets about that. They're hoping that people forget about the last 8-9 years of the Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and everything else that we've tried to do, and bending backwards and bending Ukraine over a barrel and conceding to Russian demands. And say, no, this time it'll work if we just freeze the contact line with no long-term security guarantees for Ukraine. And that is the alternative that people like Vivek Ramaswamy, Matt Gaetz, and Marjorie Taylor Greene are offering. But at the same time, Marjorie Taylor Greene is coming out and saying, hey guys, we need to support Israel. We need to support Israel with weapons and guns and bombs, and we need to increase military spending because we need to support Israel's struggle against Hamas. And even though this would be implicit, Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank. Implicit from that statement. That isn't an endless war. That 80 to 90 year conflict isn't an endless war. The war in Ukraine's an endless war, apparently. Let's read a little bit about this, though, before I talk about Charlie Kirk's post later, because Charlie Kirk's post got me so, ooh, I got under my skin last night. Let's read a little bit about this. Iko Rich, thank you so much for the tier 1. Congressional showdown. Can lawmakers boost Ukraine aid by $50 billion or even more? Some senators from both parties say a year-long package is the best way to overcome House upheaval and signal support to Kiev. Pro-Ukraine senators from both parties, unnerved by the upheaval in the House, say they want to move quickly to pass a year-long aid package for the war-torn country that far exceeds the amount of aid requested by President Biden in August and would last through the 2024 election. By the way, I like this. I like other senators bringing this issue forward because I do not think Biden has been, even if Biden has dealt with this crisis better than many of the alternatives, Biden isn't being decisive enough now to signal support for Kiev and to build the long-term support that will be necessary to end the war as soon as possible, which I think that should be our goal, because the longer the war drags on, the more likely support could waver. And so give them the tools they need to finish the job now. If you have somebody trying to build a house or anybody trying to get any job, the more slowly you deliver them the tools to get the job done. If I want somebody to build a house and I'm like, okay, I'll get you concrete next week, and then I'll get you rebar the month after that, and then I'll get you nails a week after that. The longer you wait, the longer it's going to take for the house to build. Biden requested $24 billion in additional aid in August, drawing opposition from many Republicans who have grown wary of further funding for the war. Now supporters of Ukraine in the Senate are aiming to offer a much bigger and longer-term package with a price tag between $50 billion and $100 billion. Many pro-Ukraine senators say that passing a large package sufficient to carry Ukraine through the next U.S. election would send a strong message abroad that the chaos in the House won't affect America's long-term commitments to Ukraine, as it struggles to push out invading Russian forces. Proponents also say it would be easier to win support for one big package versus several smaller packages, especially from Republicans under growing pressure from their party voters to oppose further spending on the war. I want to be one and done, said Lindsey Graham. I want to get them through this next fighting season, through the next year, so the Russians will realize this gets worse for them, not better. But any future aid package is expected to meet resistance from the expanding rate of Republicans who have grown frustrated by what they see as a lack of accountability for the funding already sent to Ukraine and who oppose pumping billions more into an overseas war effort instead of addressing pressing issues at home, such as border security. Okay, number one, I want to see the Republicans put forward their monitoring plan for U.S. aid. I want to see them put it forward and go after this corruption and bring evidence forward of it. Because so far, they haven't been able to prove that any of the military aid that we've sent over there has been funneled off in this way. That is yet to be proven. I've seen some issues with developmental aid. There's been some issues about the reselling of humanitarian aid. A lot of this really has to do with the government officials giving their friends contracts, and how contracts are rewarded, and the kickbacks that come from that is a big way of how corruption in Ukraine has always worked. And I've seen that when it comes to rebuilding efforts in Bucha. But the idea that people have in their mind of Ukrainian corruption, of we sent over a tank and before we know it, Hamas is driving the tank down the road, is absolutely ridiculous. It's silly. But when we have Zelensky coming to the House to talk to the people who have concerns about accountability when it comes to aid, he's snubbed. Kevin McCarthy doesn't accept him, kicks him out to try to appease these radicals in his party, and any transparency that they could have tried to develop in that conversation, those concerns they could have brought to him directly, was avoided. And he had to go to the National Archives, a building off the Capitol steps where not all Congress people attended. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's people who really want to bring transparency to the war. She didn't go because she doesn't give a fuck. Because her concern isn't, oh, we're spending too much money. Because immediately once violence starts between Israel and Palestine, she's like, send Israel everything they need. Go, go, guns, bombs, spend. Yes, we need to increase military spending. Yes. But then when it comes to defending a new democracy in Europe, the largest war in Europe since World War II, Russia doing an imperial land grab, something that would promote Euro-Atlantic stability, which has been the basis of American prosperity since the end of World War II. When it comes to preserving a democracy that we made a commitment to, that if you give up your nuclear arsenal in the interest of world security and not having a nuclear crisis, we will protect your sovereignty, respect your sovereignty, and come to your aid if your sovereignty is threatened. And we abandoned them for 8 to 9 years. 8 to 9 years, we essentially abandoned them outside of small aid packages. And really, the aid packages didn't pick up for real until like 2019 when it comes to weapons that they can actually use to blow up invading tanks if the Russians were to invade. And that wasn't done by the presidency. That was done by Congress. Trump tried to stop it. He tried to get in the way of it. But that's not as worthy of a struggle as giving Israel bombs to help enforce their occupation and bomb the Gaza Strip and kill a bunch of children. And that is what's going to be the result of it. I'm fine with the terrorists in southern Israel that engage in the massacres being brought to justice. But the idea that us like throwing our weight behind Israel is going to bring some like quick end to this war, or that any of the arguments that Marjorie Taylor Greene made against funding endless wars would not apply to long-standing American military commitments to Israel. I mean, if anything, Benjamin Netanyahu has shown that his strategy for containing the violence in the Gaza Strip, or containing radicalism, or containing groups like Hamas, is to have their occupation in perpetuity, that this was a manageable crisis. And he's shown that that is not the case. And now he's going to try to make it a manageable crisis again. And there's a good chance he's going to fail. What was the other part of this? Lack of accountability. I already talked about that. Was bumping billions more to overseas war effort instead of addressing pressing issues at home. Again, the thing that gets me, many of these same people want to send bombs to Israel.
Burns is
That's the first thing.
Immoral,
Second thing,
morally corrupt,
many of them don't want to address the issues at home. Every single Republican voted against an extension of the child tax credit that helped cut child poverty in half. When I say address issues at home, what that will ultimately end up meaning is either tax cuts to billionaires, spending money on guns and bombs that are going to sit in storehouses in the United States, or building a border wall or more border security. But I also don't understand how you couldn't also like invest in electing election judges and trying to go through these different asylum cases while also supporting Ukraine. Why do we think so little of the United States that we couldn't walk and chew bubblegum and spend 0.4% of our GDP in supporting Ukraine? It is unknown how the weekend attack on Israel by Palestinian militants might alter lawmakers' thinking on aid for Ukraine. The surprise Hamas assault sent shockwaves through Washington has already reinforced U.S. attention on helping a key Middle East ally. The ouster of Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker further imperils future Ukraine funding. Even if the new speaker supports Ukraine aid with a historically narrow margin of 221 to 212, he could lose no more than 4 GOP votes to advance most legislation. If all House Democrats vote no, seeking help from Democrats to advance a bipartisan bill that includes Ukraine aid could result in a motion to vacate the chair, the same resolution to oust the speaker by majority vote that brought down McCarthy. The uncertainty over whether Ukraine's largest donor will continue to fund the war in the same way has rattled European allies that take their cues from Washington in sending their own weapons to Kiev and maintaining a unified front against Moscow. Sometimes the UK is the one that breaks the line, though. Like with they were the first one to send Challenger tanks, and those were the first one to send Western tanks, and that led to America approving Abrams, and that led to the Germans saying okay to the Leopards. The U.S. Congress has approved more than $100 billion in military, economic, and humanitarian assistance since the start of the Russian invasion, funding that European countries would struggle to match if the U.S. scaled back. Pro-Ukraine senators said new aid would need to move some time between when the Senate returns from recess on October 16th and when the current stopgap spending bill is set to expire on November 17th. They have expressed cautious optimism over pursuing a larger package. A lot of us feel like there is some logic there. Rather than try to do this in a small bite that may get harder and harder and harder, let's just be candid with people about what the longer-term need is and see if we can do it, said Senator Tim Kaine. We do think we've got the vote in both houses to do it. Yeah, but if the House Speaker won't bring it forward, or if they don't have a House Speaker that is willing to bring it forward because it could cause a motion to vacate the chair, that's going to be a problem. At least some Republicans in the House favor this approach. Representative Michael McCall of Texas, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said he and others who support Ukraine, along with then Speaker McCarthy, had met with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. They told him they thought a year of funding would make more sense, to give the Ukrainians a sense of confidence, but also from a political standpoint, not to take this vote every 3 months. The National Security Council didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. But McCall said everything in the House is on hold after McCarthy's removal. I'm not sure who the next speaker is going to be and whether they're going to be where they're going to be on this issue. Several senators and aide interviewed by the Wall Street Journal put the total amount needed to fund Ukraine through the next U.S. elections between $50 billion and $100 billion. It's very important that if we all agree on the number, that we have a process that leads to a successful result, said Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said it could move as part of a spending legislation, a continuing resolution to keep the government open, or as a standalone bill. Graham has suggested $60 billion to $70 billion as the amount needed for Ukraine aid through November 2024 presidential elections. He said he sees that estimate as the outer limits. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, also a strong supporter of Ukraine, said if it was up to him, the number would be closer to $100 billion. True! But he said he could be able to compromise if they were okay to bring it down to $60 billion. Hey, wait. Don't let this out of the gate at the start. Don't let this out of the... If you say, let's do $100 billion, but I'm willing to move down to $60 billion, then what you're really saying is $60 billion. Because that's where they're going to start with you at, and they're going to try to move you off the $60 billion to $50 billion or $45 billion. Stick with this. Just say this, and then in close negotiations, you'd be like, well, maybe $90 billion. It might be that he wanted $60 billion, and he's saying $100 billion, so this seems like a more reasonable compromise. This is the same thing that Graham is talking about anyway. The path for a Ukraine aid package is smoother in the Senate than in the House. Over the summer, 71 senators had voted to defeat an amendment to the annual defense policy bill that would have limited the delivery of aid to Ukraine until America's North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies deliver on the alliance agreement to invest at least 2% of their gross domestic product to military spending. What a fucking stupid bill. 13 Republican senators voted no. Ha! 13 get cucked. 13% of the Senate. In the House, a September 28th vote showed broad bipartisan support for Ukraine aid. 331 lawmakers in the 433-member House voted to pass a measure appropriating $300 million in security assistance. But the number of Republicans opposed it made up more than half of the GOP conference. That is scary, how much that has transformed. Basically half of House Republicans being against Ukraine aid at this point. McCarthy voted. I think there's compromises that could be made. Like Biden was just like weird border security things as part of it, try to bundle it. They could maybe try to. People are talking about bundling it with Israel aid as well. Try to get some holdouts, some people who want a holy war in Israel, but don't necessarily want to defend democracy in Ukraine. Like bizarre bullshit, but that is being talked about. In fact, I think there's an article about it right here. White House plans to put Ukraine, Taiwan, and border funding in an Israel request. The White House has some key lawmakers have been discussing linking Ukraine and Israel aid. Officials in President Joe Biden's administration have privately told lawmakers that the White House is preparing a supplemental funding request to submit to Congress that includes money for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and U.S. border security, according to two congressional officials, an administration official, and a defense official. Administration officials also said the request would aim to address the strain that providing additional military support for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan would put on the Defense Department stockpiles, the sources said, by asking for money to build more weapons. Biden said Tuesday that when Congress returns, we're going to ask them to take urgent action to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners. When I say build more weapons, money to build more weapons, I would assume that would include investments in our defense production infrastructure, right? So that we can then produce more, for example, M777 howitzer shells, Excalibur shells, stuff like that. I would assume, because if it's just, well, we just want to be able to buy a contract that'll get to us in like 8 or 9 years, like those shells are needed now, not in 8 and 9 years. Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tuesday the Office of Management and Budget is drafting the supplemental request. What exact form that all takes, that will be worked out. At the White House news briefing Wednesday, National Security Advisory Council spokesperson John Kirby addressed the possibility of putting all the funding requests together, telling reporters active conversations are going on. I'm not prepared to detail those conversations for you right now or to tell you what the parameters are going to be because, frankly, those parameters haven't been arrived at or even decided upon, but we are in active discussions about additional funding. The White House and some key lawmakers have been discussing linking Ukraine and Israel aid. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall of Texas said he's open to a package that includes aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, as well as funding for additional security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Biden administration officials, and also when they say additional funding for U.S.-Mexico border, do they just mean like building? Because I heard they're going to build 20 miles of wall, right? Even though Joe Biden's also saying it doesn't work. And I know they're saying, well, the money's already been allocated for it, so it is what it is. But he's also waiving, like, local requirements in Texas to be able to do it. Anyway, it depends on, like, what that form of aid comes in. For example, if this package includes more shells for Israel that they will likely use in bombing the Gaza Strip, which they've openly said that, like Benny Gantz, part of the unity government, was like, when asked about civilian casualties, he was like, how dare you ask me about Palestinian casualties. How dare you? How dare you ask the nation that's about to invade another nation if they're going to abide by international law as they cut off food, water, and bomb routes out of the country and level building up to building, dropping 6,000 to 8,000 bombs. But yeah, I'm not so confident in giving them weapons because I don't really trust the IDF to use those weapons appropriately just to target the people who are engaged in the terrorism in southern Israel. Probably be easier to argue, for example, air defense for the Iron Dome system, considering how many missiles got through. But the idea of packaging bombs to bomb an occupied people with bombs to liberate an occupied people is something that makes me very uncomfortable. Do you guys get what I'm saying? I hope that sounds reasonable enough. Anyway, where were we? We were reading this article, yes. In the House, a September 28th vote showed broad bipartisan support for Ukraine. Oh, I already read this. McCarthy voted in favor of the measure, as did Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who is now a contender to replace him. He's taken the L, though. That we found it out like an hour ago. So it's not Steve Scalise, apparently. Unless he's going to make another run of it. He could attempt again. Another speakful hopeful, Jim Jordan, was among the 117 House Republicans who voted against the aid. Jim Jordan actually said he was going to vote for Steve Scalise. But now that Steve Scalise has lost, maybe he's going to put his hat back in the ring again. Who knows? But he is against the aid. If Jim Jordan becomes House Speaker, he's going to do everything he can to stop aid from going to Ukraine. 2 days later, and a major setback for pro-Ukraine lawmakers, Congress passed a short-term spending bill that didn't include any Ukraine aid. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Ukraine aid remains a priority, but they didn't outline next steps. McConnell said Congress needs more direction from the administration. It's not. It's your part. If there is not a speaker to even move forward with a vote, how is more direction from the administration going to help? I do think the administration should be asking for more than 24, and I think they should be showing direction in that way. But if there's not a House Speaker, they can't do anything anyway. Blumenthal said that he's in conversations with Graham and other Senate Republicans about solutions, including the addition of a U.S. border security element to a Ukraine aid package. Border security is a goal that I and other Democrats share, so I think there is a potential sweet spot for compromise if border security is something that Republicans require. Graham said that there is overwhelming support for Ukraine and U.S. border security in the House, but he warned any border provisions would need to include policy changes to tighten asylum rules. What type of tightening? Republicans have expressed interest in a range of changes to the asylum system, including reinstating former President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. I think that's a terrible idea. Performing rapid asylum adjudications in the southern border and narrowing the asylum definition to exclude many of the reasons why migrants claim this protection. It's also a terrible idea. Senate Democrats say they are open to more funding for border security, but warn that linking the Ukraine issue to immigration policy could be fatal for both efforts. I want immigration reform to get done. I want more money for the border, said Senator Chris Murphy, but I get really nervous when people try to tie two difficult things together. That's very, very... That only happens when it starts to get dicey. And it's not good that this aid has gotten dicey in any way, not even 2 years into it. And who knows how long this war could go on. It could go on for 5 years for all we know. But I will say, while there is a group of congressmen and a small group of senators that are trying to sabotage aid for Ukraine, the majority of the House still support it, the majority of the Senate still supports it, the presidency supports it, a really good chunk of the American public supports it, and there are also figures pushing for more than what Biden requested, which I agree with those calls. And I do want to highlight that because I think most of the highlighting has been on the dumb fuck oxygen thieves like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Matt Gaetz, Tucker Carlson, and this type of commentary. People who know nothing about the war in Ukraine, people who are pushing crazed conspiracy theories. Vivek Ramaswamy talking about weapons we've sent to Ukraine going to the cartels. Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about the organ harvesting funding the government. Tucker Carlson talking about 7-to-1 death tolls, which is just completely false. Pushing like the oppression of Christians narrative, like Charlie Kirk recently talking about the ethnic Russians. The ethnic Russians want to be free. We concentrate a lot on that, and I want to make sure we also remember that these people exist too. People who think Biden isn't doing enough, and those forces exist within the Republican Party. And they're in the House, they're in the Senate, and they're involved in these conversations. And by God, man, I hope they don't cave to the mob of uninformed lunatics who are repeating these talking points. Russian talking points, Russian state talking points. Russia knows that in a 1-to-1, just capital battle of what we can finance and what they can finance, and what the entirety of NATO can finance in Ukraine and what they can, we can finance more. And so they're trying to do their best to undercut support through propaganda, which is being ate up by sitting Congress people. And that needs to be commented on more. That when sitting Congress people in a party is eating up the propaganda of an invading nation state before then trying to undermine the resistance of the nation state trying to stop that colonization, there is a question. Whose side is Marjorie Taylor Greene on?